Dr. Eric Worcester, we have a brother from down under, Nathaniel Swain. Dr. Nathaniel, great name, by the way,
Oh, thank
Nathaniel.
you. Great names for great people, right?
I tell you what, man, gift from God. I think that's what the name means,
It's
man.
a lot to
So
live up to, but we can do it.
I tell
It's
you
a heavy
what, bro.
legacy.
I know, right? And it's Nathaniel. It's not Nate. It's not Nathan. It's not Nate Dog. It's
Oh,
Nathaniel.
people will try everything in Australia. So I had to come up with one shortening. Nate is fine if you really like. In Australia, they can't handle two-syllable names, let alone three syllables. So the shortening was bound to happen. Nat
I
sounds
like
like
it.
an insect. So let's avoid Nat if possible.
I agree. The longer you know me, the shorter my name gets. My mom is just Nah. You know what I mean? So it's
Here you
that
go.
that's how it works. But Dr. Swain, check this out, man. Eric and I are always trying to connect with people that we want to learn from. Like we're constantly learning. We're trying to
Yep.
improve our own craft, and neuroscience is huge.
Yeah.
And how do we connect the neuroscience that's out there with practical, applicable teaching? And you've got this book called Harnessing the Science of Learning. And that's like, boom, that's lightning in a bottle, man. That's connecting it. And that's what we want to learn from, man. But before we get into that, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do. And you've got an outstanding like cognitorium work and website stuff and all this cool stuff. It's
Give us the
great.
deep.
Yeah, give us the details.
Yeah, well, so I'm a dad. I've got two beautiful kids of my own. One starting first grade, and he's so keen. Hitting 29th of December, which is basically the start of the holidays after Christmas for us. We've got a whole month of January off. He was like, 29th of December, let's go back to school. Monday's grade one, right? Let's go. So, he's loving life. Education is a big part of our family, and we just love it. My wife's originally a teacher as well. And then my daughter's doing 4-year-old early child care sort of thing. What we call kindergarten, confusingly here, is the year before school starts. And so I'm first and foremost a dad. I'm also a teacher. So I've loved the time and the effort and, the input in the classroom that I've had over the years. And now I'm a teacher educator. So I'm working with teachers. I teach them at university. La Trobe Uni is my home, and that's a university here in Melbourne, down in the south of Australia. And I just love working with teachers and talking about teaching all day, every day. I've been bragging to everyone about my summer reading list, which I've tried to knock off about 10 books already in the first sort of month of the year. And they've all been education. Sorry, I haven't read anything that hasn't had anything to do with classroom teaching or learning in general. So I'm a big, absolute educational nerd, but also love debating and talking about all the big issues that affect teachers' lives.
So what'd you read?
That's pretty
What'd you
awesome.
like?
Yeah. What are you reading?
What were your highlights?
Well, big controversial one from the 80s, something that I read it and thought, wow, I'm writing about this in 2024 or 25, and this person was writing about it in the 80s. E.D. Hirsch, so famous sort of scientist, linguist, he wrote a book called Cultural Literacy back then, and it's controversial as all hell, but basically people have lambasted him as being, just a white sort of focused on the Western sort of knowledge, and no other knowledge is important. But if you actually read the book, which I now have read, it's not what he's saying at all. He's saying that there needs to have a shared body of knowledge that us as citizens have access to in order for us to actually communicate properly, to understand the allegories and the metaphors and the idioms that pop up in conversation. You have to know a little bit about the body of knowledge that it's drawing upon, whether it's Greek mythology, idioms that have come through ancient China and found their way into English, or all kinds of things from the American Revolution to the English sort of, the conquering William the Conqueror in 1066. All of these different phrases that find our way into our zeitgeist and knowledge actually are drawn upon history, geography, science, all the humanities knowledge there. And he was in trouble in the 80s because he dared to say something like that in a time when knowledge was seen as optional. It's like you could look that up if you need to. And in this day and age, you can get ChatGPT to write it for you. So I love this book because it's saying all the things that we're saying now as part of this group of teachers interested in how learning happens and how best to teach. But he said it 40 years ago.
I remember reading that book a long time ago. And
okay. Yeah.
What I remember, and you're gonna have to help me out with this because it has been a long time. I think it's about 20 years ago that I read it. The controversy for me was who are the people that's cultivating that shared knowledge? And the people that were in control that's cultivating that knowledge were your WASP, your white Anglo-Saxon, Protestants. So, but I just think that wasn't intentional. I just think that was who was kind of at the table at that time. So I remember reading it saying, well, who else is at the table? Are there African American scholars and historians at that table? Are there Arabic, Muslim? I mean, like, how do we create a more, I guess I want to say inclusive kind of like shared
and representational,
representational. But I never felt, I'm with you, I never felt that it was his methodology to be exclusive. I just think that's what he was working with at the time. So
definitely. So to answer that quickly, I guess it's more of a reaction to how language sort of evolves and how it happens. So the things that are important to us as members of a community, E.D. Hirsch spends a long time talking about the importance of a national body of knowledge or a national vocabulary, mainly because it allows people within that same thought community to have a shared way of communicating, which is so important to be, a fully fledged citizen, to be able to understand the things that are being talked about in the newspapers, to be able to, understand your rights and your responsibilities as a citizen as well. So that national level is really important, but he also didn't discount the fact that there's so many local variations and, subcultures that are rich and important as well. And he makes big points of saying that, which is ironic given how much he's been critiqued for that stuff. But out of necessity, there's a shared body of knowledge base that then creates the shared language that we use. And it's not that, it's inherently good or inherently better than any other form of knowledge, but it is the body of knowledge that most people draw upon, or that is mainstream, in the sense that you really should know about this if you're going to be able to read the newspaper, if you're going to be able to pick up a book and have a go, and in that way access the world. I think E.D. Hirsch's vision is that all people would have proper access to that information, so that they could then be part of the change makers that can change the world. And if they want to change the what we're talking about, to change the discourse, so to speak, they do that from a powerful position, which many people of color and people from historically marginalized backgrounds are now doing, because they are able to occupy spaces, have voices that echo throughout the land, so to speak, digital and otherwise, because they're able to use that form of communication. Where E.D. Hirsch's thesis is so helpful, and just to get not too technical, hopefully, is that if you deny students access to that big conversation or the big discourses just because you haven't taught that knowledge well enough in school, then students will be reliant on whatever local knowledge and local discourse they've had access to, which basically that means they're going to be in the same position or the same kind of subcultures that their parents were in, and they won't have as many options to move around and change their sort of role in society, as much as we want social mobility to be a reality.
That's pretty cool, man. That's pretty cool.
Dr. Swain, speaking of controversial of sorts, have you read John McWhorter?
No, I have to look that up.
He's a linguistics guy I think he's from Columbia. He's got a great take on a number of things. He's very interesting. He's on TV now a fair bit. But yeah, John McWhorter, if you haven't read him.
Just Googled him, I'm going to have a read.
Yeah, there you go. He's got a number of different, he's moved a little bit more into social issues now, which I loved his last book. But before that, he did focus a lot on linguistics and language and different groups and how they use it. So John McWhorter is great.
I think he's got a linguistics background as well, so that's really interesting. Yeah,
that's very cool. All right, Dr. Swain, Eric and I were chatting a little bit about just doing a little prep before you came on, and we were diving into best practice, better practice, how do we help our teachers take that tier 1 instruction and just maximize it, get every ounce out of that tier 1,
that finite time,
that very finite time, right? And so we're going to start a little debate over here, and Nathaniel, you just help us out over here. I can help. I don't want to say I'm any one style, but I do like small group, more differentiated instruction. I think that there's a place for whole group instruction, is so everyone can kind of cast a wide net. Every teacher has to explain the information. but then kind of break it down into those more differentiated chunks. I'm a huge differentiation person. And I think that that's a good way to help kids make sure that they have more voice and choice in the classroom. All right. I think my friend Dr. Worcester is a little bit different though, right?
I'm gonna do two things here. So first, Dr. Swain, what do you think of the term best practices? Do you have any opinion on it?
It's not a bad term. I think it's hard to know what that means because it's obviously contested what is best. But I usually to cut through some of the multiple meanings of evidence-based or best practice or what are we actually talking about there. I tend to use science-informed practice or, the science of learning is a bit of a catch-all to try and talk about how we are interested in research and in points of view that have been tested empirically, that have some sort of basis in, research that is more than just a case study or an interview or a discussion sort of piece. So yeah, best practice is fine, but it sort of means it depends on what you mean by that.
No, yeah. Take a stand. I agree with you. Best practice is terrible. So if we could get rid of that term, I'd be thrilled. I was trying to say I try to say more effective practices because best practices, like you said, it can change.
What does that mean? Yeah.
And I think it can be off-putting. Anyway, Nathaniel said something, and he was trying to do a little bit of a trick with what he said because he said, "Do you like whole group or do you like small group?" And he linked small group with differentiation. Dr. Swain, do you think those two terms are linked together, or do you think you can differentiate in a whole group? What do you think?
So I think when we do have small group, it feels like we're differentiating really well because we are sort of having a different form of instruction for a different subset of the class. My problem is not with small group per se. It's more what everyone else is doing whilst you're doing small group. Yep. So I think small group instruction is fantastic. I just think that if you're delivering the similar information or the same information with some slight variations, and you're doing that 4 or 5 times because you've got 4 or 5 groups, it's probably not the best use of that format. Yeah, so I think that the flip would be if, given that, and what you'll find in the book and other people who might pick this up, is that humans basically learn in the same ways. I know that learning styles is really popular and still finding their way into classrooms and teacher education. The idea that students have unique ways of learning and things like that is obviously very appealing. It hasn't borne out into the research, mainly because if we ask students what their style is and then cater to that style, the research shows that it doesn't make any difference. So we end up doing more work trying to adapt the instruction to make it more visual or kinesthetic or verbal or otherwise, and that doesn't have an impact. Essentially, the style of or the mode of instruction is probably more helpful. Should be determined by the nature of the information. I like to say things like, when you're teaching, geometry, you're not going to teach that just with verbal information, just saying there is a shape and it has a line connected to another line, and then that makes a triangle. You're just going to show a lot of triangles and you're going to do things with that visual medium. Yes, you're going to talk about triangles as well and just, not just switch your voice off, but you're probably going to lean on that visual medium a lot more. Music, you're going to listen to a lot of music. You're going to play a lot of music. It's going to be kinesthetic because you don't want them just sitting there appreciating it. We want them actually creating the music themselves. Yeah. You get my drift there. So, if every student is basically learning the same ways, but potentially not at the same level to start with, then your temptation may be to sort of have different groups that are based on different starting points or different levels of complexity. And my argument would be that in order to not wrap yourself in a pedagogical sort of gymnastic move, the best place to start is with a really solid first lesson. And the first lesson will be the best bet of what you have based on your knowledge of where your students are at. It might be based on your scope and sequence. Teach that first tier 1 instruction lesson really well. It might go for 20 minutes, might go for 30 minutes. And then that's when you can differentiate. So if you've got students who aren't ready from that first lesson to do anything by themselves, they're not ready for independent practice, bring them into a small group. If you've got a group of students who are ready to go and they're off doing their independent, off they go. And if you've got ones who are like, oh, that independent task is somewhat easy for me, you can let them power through that task and then have another task waiting for them that's more challenging or more open-ended. And that's where I feel like the differentiation can happen. based on the level of support that you have and also the different exit points. It's like you might exit this lesson at the core level, and that's fine. Other students will challenge themselves. They'll do core and then plus, and others will do core plus and beyond. And that's what's really cool, is that differentiation could then be in the conversations you have with them about the core lesson and how they've gone further, or in that extra small group support that, they've got 5 or 6 kids who can't do this yet. You're going to get more core instruction with me. And that way I've planned one solid lesson, but then I've differentiated based on how they've navigated that lesson. And it's also a lot less planning, which I think is really helpful for our teachers and their limited time.
So that sounds like 1 point whole group, 0 points small group. That's what I heard, right?
If you're keeping score, but it's sort of like a compromise between the two, right? I just think if you start with small group and then you sort of try and pull it together, that's when you tie yourself in knots, because some kids are on this trajectory, other kids are on another trajectory, and the 2 groups or 3 groups might not ever intersect again, because low groups go slow, medium groups go medium, high groups go fast, and that then trajectory means that you're just going to constantly see groups separating from each other rather than coming closer together.
What Dr. Worcester loves, Dr. Worcester is a sage on the stage, man. He'll sit up there and he'll say these 30-minute, 45-minute stories, and he'll go off on these tangents, and the kids are just captivated with his storytelling, and then he wonders why, he gets a 15% pass rate. But damn it, his story.
Ouch! Wow, that's quite the report card there for you, Eric.
So great.
So
it might have been 20%.
Bit of a caricature, but.
So Dr. Swain, so here's where I'm asking this, because I go into, I'm in elementary schools, I'm in middle schools, and I'm in high schools. And when I'm in high schools, man, I see the sage on the freaking stage all the time. I see, these high school teachers, boy, they're just lecturing. They got your lecture notes, and for some reason, the kids don't seem to be hanging on every word into it. But that's how they were taught, and teachers usually teach how they were taught. So is there any science? Now, I love a good story, bro. I love a good story. I love a captivating entertainer. I get you. Is there any science behind that, though, when it comes to student learning?
Well, I think that one of the messages that I tried to get through in the book is that when we're talking about explicit teaching of that, teacher-led form of the lesson, or that part of the learning trajectory, it's not about lecturing. And I am a lecturer, and you'll be happy to know that even when I'm lecturing, so when I've got a group of students, 150, 200, some online, some in person, it's still not really a typical lecture. What I'm doing in that 50 minutes is actually what I would do with high school students as well. So I break my instruction down into 3 or 4 minute chunks. I then do something with the students after every 3 or 4 minutes, sometimes even more than that. Sometimes I get them to repeat back key phrases, and so that they've got a choral response or a call and answer like that. Sometimes I'll get them to read aspects of text and then turn and talk to their partner, do a quick answering a question. They'll write something on a mini whiteboard. You'd love this, Nathaniel. We have the room full of 200 students, and they've all got a mini whiteboard. And as I'm walking around up and down the aisles and through the rows, I can see whether they've been paying attention or not. So those laptops are dipped. Their laptops are in the bag. The kids are hanging on every word, mainly because there's the expectation that you're actually going to be doing something in this lecture. It's not really a typical lecture, is essentially what I'm aiming for there. So when I work with middle and high school students, I try and teach them the same things. Don't talk to the students for longer than 15 minutes without getting them to do something. Ideally, you do something every 5 or 4 minutes, because then at least there's a check to see if you're on the right track. If you're 15 minutes into your 30-minute spiel and you don't really know what students are thinking, then you're setting yourself up for failure, because humans aren't very good at paying attention. It's one of the things, especially in this day and age, they're not fantastic at just maintaining their focus and knowing what to do during that time. They don't take judicious notes the way that they might have used to. And students sort of appreciate the fact that, I have to be on in this time. The biggest bit of feedback I've had from my teacher graduates, the ones who are going off to learn how to teach in their own classrooms, is that they said, I felt like I learned something here today. Whereas other classes they're comparing to, they're not necessarily. They're sitting there, they're wondering what the point is, they're looking at their friends, they're on their phones, some of them are watching videos. Who knows what they're doing on the laptops if the laptops are in view. And these are going to be teachers. They were only students 5 years ago, but they're very much still students in that way. So it's the same for middle and high school if we're not really onto them.
Yeah. Great.
Nathaniel, I got two topics I want to talk about, but I want to talk first about something that you mentioned that you said it pretty fast, and I think for
So I am a fast talker. I apologize for that.
the rapidity of the speech was fine. It was just that it was a concept that I think many people here would be taken aback. And I read an article recently on the same topic. It was about learning styles, and I guess the question isn't specifically about learning styles, but the broader question is people get very wedded to certain practices because for whatever reason they're taught that, but they believe in that. So learning styles is one example. The way we teach reading, certainly in the state where Nathaniel and I are from, we were big into a method that I don't want to say it's been debunked, but it's more or less been debunked. But people were very passionate because what they were told was the way to do things. So how do you get people past that deep felt desire that this works and this is important to move them to a different way?
Just repeat the main part of that question there. I just dropped out for a second.
Just when people are so invested in a method that they've been taught, like learning style is critically important, and they
or the balanced literacy piece.
Yeah. How do you move past that?
Okay, so I think what really helps people move, because there's people all around the English-speaking world who are making moves and changes in their schools. And for the leaders who are listening to this, the biggest challenge you might have is winning over your staff as to why the change is even needed. Often we already have change fatigue. We have change phobia. We're not into it. Like, teachers don't want to have to change things because that's more work. But the thing that really moves schools and moves teachers in terms of seeing why they probably could make a bigger difference and why this change is worth investing in is actually seeing the difference in their students' engagement in real time, and the difference in, you know, the learning sort of trajectory and the amount of growth that can happen. So the data really does speak for itself. Schools that have done this work in Australia, which I've featured in the book, but equally in states around the US as well, they're finding that when they change their teaching methods, the data is like chalk and cheese. It's like, oh, this is where our kindergartners were last year at this point in the year. This is where our kindergartners are now. And it's the same batch of kids that are coming through, just, you know, a different set of individuals. You know, to see a marked shift like that from one year to the next when you've implemented practices like that is pretty astounding. But even if you're not a data person, even if you're cynical about it and whether it's relevant to you, the thing that I find challenges teachers to feel like there's a need to change is having someone come into their own classroom and do something very different with their students. You know, you might choose this is what I do with schools all the time. You choose your most skeptical teacher, the one who's like, nah, I'm never going to do this. And I find teaching quite tricky sometimes, or I just like my style of doing things. And often they aren't using every instructional minute the way that they probably could, mainly because it hasn't been a big impetus in you know, times gone by. We haven't thought about efficiency in a positive way. We've thought about it in a negative sort of you know, a way of punishing teachers for the way they've used their time. But efficiency is actually a gift for your teaching and for your students as well, because if you are more efficient, more effective, you obviously have more opportunity to work with your students on more meaningful content rather than on the faff that can happen around the classroom. I don't know if that term's familiar in the American context, faff.
We don't say faff, so go ahead. What's that mean?
Faff is like,
but
you know, it's just wasted time, or, you know, fluff, you know, like all the stuff that you end up doing, like, oh, who needs a new pencil today? Like, let's have a chat about pencils. Have you got enough pencils? Who's going to sharpen that pencil? Do you like the length of this pencil? No. So let's have a debate about whose pencil is whose and who's ready to go. That can take 5 or 10 minutes to set up about who's got the right materials. I didn't bring my thing today. I don't have a sharpener. I don't have a rubber. Like, what do I do? Where's my eraser? Blah, blah, blah. So all of that fluff, or faff, as we call it here in Australia, is completely unnecessary. And so if you're not used to being aware of where you could cut that fluff, you might not have seen the potential of what you can use those 150 minutes for at the start of your day. The same sort of stuff could be like, you know, in Eric's big spiels that he has, the big stories that he tells. Maybe he takes his students down the garden path in a way that they don't really need to. He could get to the point a lot faster, and he could synthesize the key messages into three main things and help build students' understanding about those three main things systematically. Yes, narrative can be fantastic because it helps crystallize the way of doing things, but sometimes our narratives, our anecdotes, our asides, or our tangents, they're actually pretty distracting. And students might be thinking about those rather than the target learning. So the thing that helps teachers then change is saying, well, there is other ways of doing things, ways that you may not have even seen before and haven't thought possible before. Getting middle school students to write their answers on mini whiteboards and hold them under their chins, and it's like revolutionary, you know, but being able to see their answers in real time and not having to wait till the end of a 20-minute sort of period where they're faffing around. So it's a verb as well as a noun. You can faff around, and it means stuff around, essentially what it means, or screw around, you might say. You can actually get a lot more out of your students in this way. And I think when teachers see that and they see how happy the kids are to be successful, to feel like they're included, and also that they're not wasting so much time, like I think that that's the thing that gets people over the line 99% of the time.
Yep.
That's great. That's great stuff, man. We got this saying in America, drill and kill. I don't know.
We do have that here.
We're drilling and killing in Australia too.
People don't like that over here either. Yeah.
I know. So I mean, I don't like it either, right? But
the term or the idea.
Well,
it rhymes, so it's
I like a rhyme. I like a good alliteration.
You do like that.
But I know that there's neuroscience that justifies repetition and practicing and remember to repeat to remember. But what would you say for someone who maybe is a staunch kind of like, well, we have to do 1,000 math problems for kids to remember this. We have to write these spelling words 15,000 times in order to codify it and remember it. Neuroscience says practice makes perfect, right? But does it really? So I'm curious on your thoughts on that.
I love the provocations, and it's things that people would be thinking as well, because the kind of instruction I'm describing probably sounds foreign to a lot of people as well. I think the goal isn't just drilling for the sake of drilling and therefore killing the joy and the motivation. It's really ensuring that your practice is frequent and ensuring that students get adequate practice, like you were sort of hinting at there. So if they haven't mastered a sound letter pattern, they just need to get more exposures, more opportunities to test themselves. That's the retrieval aspect, not just being told, say this after me, in like a drill sergeant sort of way, but actually saying, well, see if you remember the things that we did yesterday, because the forgetting curve, this rapid decline in memory of things that we've taught our students is real. It's established. It's 150 years old in the science in terms of we will forget things that we've just taught or just been taught by our teachers. So if we, next day we're reviewing, we're going over things that you should know. It's for the challenge and for the excitement of, can you remember these things? Because if you do remember these little pieces, whether they're maths facts or phonics rules or spelling patterns, for example, then learning's going to get easier for you. So I haven't met a school or a teacher yet who's embraced these principles and who've said, like, I just feel like I'm drilling them all the time. That's not the impression when you design this well. When you ensure that the practice is meaningful, the practice is targeted, and it's faded out. So eventually you don't have to practice the same things again because it's been mastered, and you move on to other things. Teachers see that as just good practice. Like, you've practiced it adequately, and then you've faded out that practice so that now you can focus on all the other cool things you're doing. Now you're getting your head around metaphors and similes, and you're using poetic uses of language because you've mastered the spelling system years ago. So I think drill and kill is where people's mind go when they don't realize this is a way to make practice systematic and make it really responsive as well. Not just drilling for the sake of drilling, but, helping them practice the things that they're actually having difficulty with. Hence the mini whiteboard, hence the cold call, which are also pretty controversial in some places. Having a cold call in your classroom can actually ensure that you know what's happening in your students' heads and that you've got them on their toes so that practice is really meaningful. We don't want them sitting there mindlessly reciting things. That's not what we're talking about. We want them making meaningful connections between things, and sometimes that needs adequate exposure and adequate practice. Hence the need to be more systematic than we probably have been in our classrooms up until now.
Yeah.
So drill and kill, Nathaniel, just needs to be rebranded.
Rebrand it, give it a new name, and also take away the negative associations. Like it's not drilling in the sense of military style. Like we're not doing that. It's fun. It's energetic. It's the kind of teaching that you do when your coach is really trying to get you to master a particular skill, like a batting strategy or a catching technique. It's meant to be fun. It's meant to be targeted, but at the end of the day, it's meant to lead to mastery, not just memorization or saying it for the sake of saying it. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But you need that foundational bedrock of knowledge. And
sometimes and then move on. It's a given. Then you don't have to talk about it anymore.
Right.
Because where I'm thinking Nathaniel's brain is we want to get to the richer parts of the curriculum. We want to get to the big questions. And my argument always is you make firm foundations so that you can leave them behind, so that you can build really cool stuff on them. If you don't get your foundations right, you can't ask really great inquiry questions. You end up struggling to spell the word that you're trying to Google. It's like, it's that kind of level of barrier that you create when your students don't have those firm foundations. But don't just drill the foundation, like move on, like get them done.
Yeah. I was in a school this week, and it's been 20 plus years, since I've been in as a classroom teacher. It's been a long time, right? But I try to make sure that I go in and I watch lessons, and I not to evaluate, just to kind of see,
to be there, yeah,
just to be there, just so I have some context, and man. Our classrooms in America, they are so diverse. I mean, so diverse. I mean, I was in a classroom, I think I was chatting with a teacher. There were like 15 different native languages that were spoken in that one classroom. She had a fluent student. She had students that were recent immigrants. She had so many different cultures and so many different variations, kids that had never been in school, and they had to learn fractions, right? And that was the lesson, and she was just like, it's damn near impossible to do this. And the other thing, so you have just how many different brains are in that classroom, and they have to leave with the same kind of like access to knowledge. So how do you apply the science of learning to, just like in Australia, exceedingly diverse classrooms, especially in urban areas like Melbourne? What would you tell that teacher or that team, maybe 2 or 3 things to really consider as they're delivering that core instruction to students with such diverse backgrounds?
So a few things there, and it's a really important but also really common question when people are thinking in this way. An obvious response would be, I'll group my students in different groups and I'll target my instruction based on that. Right. But essentially, when you're teaching fractions, there's really the same core concepts and the same core underlying principles that are being taught. And the goal is not to just say, well, we're up to fractions, everyone's going to do fractions necessarily, but to understand do your students have all the prerequisite knowledge to access that? And if not, systematically planning backwards 4 years in advance. What do they need to learn in kindergarten, in first, second, and third, and then fourth grade in order to make that possible? So scopes and sequences, I don't know if that's a term you use a lot in the US. These are really powerful documents. They're more specific than, say, curriculum standards, which is like what should be covered. It's more about what should be mastered. So what should they have exposure to, and then what should they master in time? So the greatest way in which you can move your whole class is really thinking about, if they're not ready for fractions, go back to the foundational skills that they don't have access to yet, and give even small bite-sized practice on those skills, so that when you come to your fractions lesson, all the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle should be there. Yes, there'll be linguistic diversity. Yes, there'll be cultural and socioeconomic diversity as well. But at the end of the day, learning fractions requires a particular constellation of certain number and conceptual skills that have to come together. And if you don't have some basic maths facts around, multiplication, you can't really do much with fractions, because they just end up being a conceptual thing where you're thinking about how big is the piece and how many pieces do I have. When you do have some maths facts, you can start talking about equivalent fractions, and you can start converting between them or adding fractions, which also relies on that conversion. Then you're playing with something a little bit more interesting. So for me, for that teacher, it's less about that lesson. It's not about that lesson in time. It's about what's been leading up to that lesson. all the work that you've put in. And if your school is not fundamentally thinking about a scope and sequence and thinking about how that lesson fits into a wider unit, which fits into wider, scopes across many years, then really you go further back in the curriculum. The students who are excelling and are doing amazingly, what you're doing there when you go back and fill in gaps that are there across, more than half of your students, is that you give them a more nuanced understanding, a more explicit understanding of something that they can already do intuitively. So going back a few steps is not a bad thing, because you're building those foundations so that you can move on. Because if you don't address that challenge or that gap, even if it's only in a third of your students, they'll never catch up. You can do it through intervention as well. You can do it through things outside of the mainstream tier 1 instruction, your tier 2 and tier 3. But if you've got more than a third or more than a half, especially, you just need to go back a few steps and fill in those blanks. And that's then, it's not about the lesson. It's about where the lesson fits into the broader sequence. And that's the real challenge, is what am I preparing them for? Not what am I just trying to do right now? And so often teachers are thinking, what am I teaching tomorrow? And who are my kids? When really they should think of, what have I been teaching up until this point? And where is it leading me to? What will I be teaching next? Or what will the next teacher be teaching? And that's when if you zoom out more, you see your role not as this person who has to just figure it out based on this group one day at a time, one lesson at a time, because that's far too zoomed in to make a big difference. We have to be able to zoom out and see how the instruction is actually over huge amounts of time. Schools that have done this well, and so I'll get off my high horse in a second. Schools that have done this well have done exactly that. They've looked at the scope and sequence. They've looked at how students have common challenges with learning particular aspects of the curriculum, and they go back and systematically backfill all of that missing information and give them all of that practice again and again and again until they've mastered it. Because then they can work with something that's much more homogenous, or at least has the foundations you can build from. Even if you've got kids that are way above, everyone's got the foundations that you can work with.
Yeah.
I love it. Let me ask you this.
Yeah, man.
Because I think that our schools, the teachers feel an immense pressure to continue moving up. And I don't want to speak for any teacher, but I think sometimes they feel shamed to do you're talking about. Why is my camera doing this? I got a new camera and it's wacky. I can't move. I have to stay very still.
Just stay still. Yeah.
No,
it's stylistic. It's like, we're in the 70s and it's like we're phasing out to another scene. It's like, it's great. It's giving me nostalgic vibes.
There's a transition there. I think it can be hard for teachers when they tell an administrator, like, my kids can't do basic math. It's like it's their fault. Well, you need to teach the standards, and they're given very little grace. That's right. I think happens sometimes. Provincio, have you seen that? And teachers are trying. They're doing the best they can. And sometimes what Dr. Swain just said is very authentic. You might have a third or half who do not have those basic skills, and they are told to keep moving forward.
Yeah, I think it sucks. I think that we've had a lot of conversations. Larry Ainsworth was on the show, who was a master at essential standards. He's a master at talking about that. Well, yeah, I mean, like I shared this on the podcast. I was in Alabama and we were looking at the standards. K-12, it was 1,450 standards that students have to be able to learn in Alabama. So it was like 1,450. I mean, that is crazy. Like in Finland, they got like, I don't know, 12 or something, So it would be outstanding to be able to say, hold up, we got to backfill. We've got these essential standards. We can't do fractions as of yet with the population because our students are coming with gaps in number sense, and we need to make sure that we get there. But in America, in so many schools, we have this notion that access equates to excellence. Coverage is better than got to cover. You got to cover it.
Yeah.
And even today, it was amazing when I was working with a teacher, very, very humble, very excellent teacher. But she said, I'm afraid that if I don't expose my students to all of these standards, then they just won't get it. And I had to have a conversation. I said, they're not learning it anyway.
Yep.
Why bother exposing? You've got a 20% pass rate. They're not getting it. So
go back. Just go back.
But the curriculum cops are going to arrest you. The pacing police are going to get you. And there is a palpable fear in a lot of our districts in America that coverage is more important than excellence, So it's I don't know how it is in Australia.
It's a really interesting challenge, but it's sort of like, there's a reason you want to keep the accelerator on, right? If you lower the standards, or if you lower the expectations, that doesn't lead to great things. So you want to keep the expectations high, but just by raising the bar and then teaching at that bar doesn't actually allow the students to get there. You need to teach all the stepping stones that allows them to get that sense of excellence. And so I don't think the solution is I've got 1 hour with my students. I'm going to break that into, 5 groups, and we're going to spend some time in that hour spending 6 minutes with each group. Like, that you're just not going to get there by doing 6 minutes in a 60-minute sort of environment. What you need to do is use every single one of those minutes and be filling in the blanks that are currently there. Schools that have made the shift from balanced literacy to the science of reading in Australia, they've had, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students going back to year 1 spelling content because they don't know the rule for doubling or not doubling the consonant, or dropping the Y, or adding, dropping the E, changing it to I, etc. So they've gone back to that, mainly because if they didn't do it, even the strongest students would continue making those errors, and they would never be able to be fluent writers or fluent readers. So there is an argument, and I think maybe the curriculum craziness is less of a thing in Australia because you can get away with a bit more here. But it means that, for good and bad, there's you would hate this example. There are schools here that say, oh, math is so hard for students. Like, if you don't want to do math today, just read a book. And students opt out of math for like 3 years. And then they go to the high school and they haven't done math for 3 years. So it's like, that's criminal. So obviously, if it's allowing that to happen, that's not good. But for the teachers of the schools that are making good curriculum decisions and saying our students haven't mastered all of this knowledge, they have permission in the way that it's set up here that they can go back to grade 1 and just fill in the blanks. But obviously, you have to do it at pace. It doesn't mean go back to grade 1 and sit there in grade 1. It means rapidly move through those things. These are older students. They shouldn't take as long as you want students to master this content. We should be able to go through faster and just cover and master the things that we need to master. Doesn't mean just starting again and being like, oh, you're in grade 5, but we're doing grade 1 now. No, that's not what we're talking about. But it is literally going back to some of those basic skills. I don't know how, legislatively or, in terms of curriculum compliance, you would make that possible. But I know that some schools are turning it around regarding maths and English instruction, and they must be going back and filling in these blanks, however they can justify it curriculum-wise.
Dr. Swain, speaking of the youth of Australia, before we got on here, Pravinci and I were talking about Jonathan Haidt and the Anxious Generation. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm yet to read that book, but I'm a big subscriber to his Substack, and I really, really like it.
Yep. So I think he's great. Social media in Australia. We're talking about the impact that I think his work has had on. We are now in our state banning cell phones from our schools, which is what I think is phenomenal, great practice. What's going on in Australia? Because I thought I read some things about social media and kids, but I don't remember.
Yeah. No, you're on the ball. So in Australia, some of the states and territories, the government schools have banned phones in schools, which I think is really smart. So they have the phones in lockers at all times, or they go in the phone safe sort of thing. Jonathan Haidt, I think, has done some great reviews on how that can work and can't work as well. So it's good to just having that in mind, that it could be really good. I think we're actually giving students a chance by implementing that only in the last 12 months. We're giving them a chance to actually feel what it's like to not be connected all the time and to actually just be focused on the learning itself. The other exciting thing in Australia, though, is that the federal government is introducing a social media age limit. So 16s and below will not be able to access social media. YouTube Kids, I think, is allowed, which is borderline in my view, especially if you're on the reels. But, no Instagram, no Twitter, no Snapchat, no Facebook, and the others. And I think what that's going to allow, really, as a parent of young kids who don't have access to devices because they're so young, and I have, I've got people that I know who their kids have access to an iPad, and it's their iPad. And it's like, I would never give my 4-year-old an iPad. It's like, what does she need an iPad for?
Right,
Read a
right.
book.
Mhm.
So, but anyway, each parent to their own. What I think hopefully the federal government is doing is setting some opportunities for parents to have those conversations with their kids and to say, well, there actually is emerging research to say that being constantly connected to people is probably not a great thing, especially at certain ages, and that we need to learn how to be in the moment and to be in our own thoughts and to feel good about accessing media that isn't so social.
Yep.
Wow. Wow.
Good
Well,
advice.
it's been outstanding to talk to you, man. Yeah, we will definitely continue this. I might even have you on for some future episodes to just maybe as a panelist to kind of just dig
I'd
into
love to, and yeah, hear more about your work as well, because it's brilliant the amount of support there is for leaders and for teachers out there now. And I know that this podcast is part of that support network. So it's just a joy to be a part of it with you guys.
So that is Nathaniel Swain, man. Dr. Swain harnessing the lightning of good
The lightning book,
science.
yeah.